Feel Amazing is a not-for-profit social enterprise set up quite specifically to look at helping to encourage more people to talk about mental health. Not just talk about it, but actually understand how they can do things to take steps to help themselves or other people to be able to get active kind of support and help for their mental health. The Feel Amazing 500 campaign is very specifically around kind of getting employers engaged. It's still one of those massive taboo areas where people are terrified of telling their employer that they might have a mental health condition, or that actually they just might not be feeling quite as well with their mental health. And I started kind of looking into what it did in terms of what it meant to Dorset. So looking at the companies and employees in Dorset, and I did a kind of an article the other day which talked about the fact that there are 171,000 days lost to mental health absenteeism just in Dorset, which is about 18.5 million quid's worth of lost wages every single year, the vast majority of which would never tell their employers that that's why they were off. I think it's still such a taboo. I have a mental health condition. I've always been honest about mine. But I think it's so difficult for some people to they may not have told themselves, so they might kind of be feeling it but don't want to recognise it. They may not have told any of their friends or family, so then telling an employer who can potentially impact whether or not you're going to get a pay rise, a promotion, keep your job, could you be singled out, could you be bullied? There are so many fears. Fear absolutely is at the heart of everything kind of mental health wise. The fear of being judged by ourselves, our peers, our colleagues, our employers, everybody, and what that might mean if you actually kind of are open enough to talk about it. And I know from my own experience, there are people who will always judge you on it. What you have to decide is whether or not that judgment actually matters to you, or whether it's more important to get the help and support that you need. Mental health has been one of those things. We all have mental health. There's no kind of surprise in that. And we are so honest and open about, if you've got a cold or you've got a backache or you've got a chest infection, we'll talk about it. But when it comes to our mental health, we still don't. And yet we all have mental health. Sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. But the fact that we are this far kind of down the line, and we talk about so many things openly in society, but we still don't talk about our mental health, what it means, what it really feels like. And I think it's more prevalent now, with social media and other things, that actually we hide it. We shine a light on the good things and we pretend that that's all there is to our world. And, I'm a mum, I've got a 4-year-old boy, and the idea of him growing up in a world where he thinks that everything he sees is how it's supposed to be, and that would have such a massive impact on him and his mental health is huge for me. And I think, I think I'm lucky. I've always been able to talk about mine, but for a lot of people, they don't have either the ability to talk about it or the right kind of questions and answers and know what they're going through. So I think if there's one thing I can achieve, it's helping people to have more conversations and get us to a point where we can start thinking about mental health the same way that we think about our physical health, and that there is no difference. There's so much of it can be overcome so quickly if you just get the right tools in place to be able to help. Looking towards kind of 2020, we're then looking at universities and schools. So my background's very much kind of charitable sector. I've done a lot of work with children's charities and schools. And for me, I think mental health kind of starts from, as young as my little lad. And if we can start there, then it won't become such a taboo for them later in life. We will find it much easier to talk about. They'll have more tools already in place so that they can talk about it and they know what to do and who to go to and who can help. And it doesn't become like a big thing then. So yeah, absolutely kind of our ambition is to look at what support we can give, but it's almost slightly easier to start with adults. We can have adult conversations. People can answer, they know what they're going through. So it's easier to have those. You have an element of control and ownership over your own life. As a child, it's a very different scenario, but also you have to balance in parents, teachers, and the children, so it's a much more complicated world. With employers, it's all grown-up adults who you'd hope could have an adult conversation. So one of the things we're doing with the Feel Amazing 500 is looking at organisations and what kind of mental health really means within those organisations. So it's opening their eyes, because I think it's very easy to assume that you don't have kind of an issue with mental health. No one talks about it, therefore it doesn't exist. So I've done some stats kind of specifically around kind of the university for you and the staff that are here. So there's roughly, going on kind of the last sort of figures, 1,576 staff at the uni. Of those, at some point, 961 of those staff may have experienced a mental health condition. Now that could be like a few days here and there, it could be a long-term condition, but that's a lot of people. 141 may at some point have considered taking their own life. That's really high. That's a scary number that we wouldn't necessarily, it's such a beautiful place. When you kind of walk into here, you wouldn't assume that many of the staff here could potentially have been in a position where at some point that they thought that might have been their only option. Now these aren't guaranteed stats, these are kind of nationalised ones applied to here, but it gives a snapshot as to actually how real this scenario is. You've got kind of 520, so roughly sort of 1 in 3 that may have been diagnosed with a mental health condition, of which 365 won't have told their colleagues. So it's still a don't talk about it secret, which is crazy. 94 of those 1,500 staff may have been living with a condition for 10 years. So you could have somebody here who's never talked about it, who's never got the support, who doesn't know who to ask or how they might be judged, how they'd be judged by their students as long with their peers, but they've been living with that as a secret for over 10 years. It's quite scary to think about. And in terms of kind of how it affects the students, again, nationalised figures sort of applied to sort of the 18,000-ish sort of students you've got here. Students are a little bit more open now about kind of coming into uni and talking about the fact they've got a mental health condition. So about 369 out of 18,000 students may have said when they signed up to uni they had a mental health issue. However, 3,510 at some point this year and amongst that cohort may experience some form of a mental health issue of one kind or another. Might not say anything, might not talk about it, might not feel they can talk about it, might not recognise it as being something that they could get help with. The most common ones are anxiety, stress and depression. And some of the time it's very easy to just pass them off. Exam stress. Exam stress, everyone's got to do it. We've got deadlines coming. But it becomes a bit of a snowball effect. If you can't deal with it at one time, then the next time you encounter it gets worse. And it gets worse again. And it affects your self-esteem and your confidence and your coping skills, so it becomes a much bigger thing. And so much kind of mental health issues occur before you are 24. So in the time up until the point where you leave university, it's almost more important for you guys to be able to talk about it now than it is later down the line, because now you are also in a position where you have more access to people and potentially a little bit more time and a bit less pressure to be able to actually get those tools and support that you need. So you're in your second year. In my second year at uni, I was the victim of a robbery. So I worked at Threshers in Southbourne, so I have PTSD. Now I'm not automatically the kind of person that someone would look at and imagine that I've got post-traumatic stress disorder. So I was held hostage for 5 minutes. I was the only person in the shop. In the sort of summer holidays of my second year, I was the only witness in court, and he got 7 years. So I have lived with my mental health since I was your age. And I have worked my entire career. I've raised about £6.5 million for charity. I've done some really big things, but all the time with my mental health. So for me, I have anxiety and stress. I have occasional sort of slight bouts of depression. I'm quite a naturally happy person. But what people don't necessarily see is all of the things that kind of go alongside of that. So actually how hard it is for me to do the things that I do. I'm very good at putting a face on it. So I can stand up in front of a crowd of people and talk, whilst actually inside feeling really anxious, feeling really nervous, really panicky about it. I know where exits always are in buildings. So there are lots of things that I do that are all trapped inside my head that someone would never necessarily realise. And I've been bullied at work more times than I've been bullied anywhere else. And that has a massive impact on my PTSD and how I feel and my coping strategies and so on. So I'm lucky I've had a lot of help, and I still do. I still go and get support now, and I'm open enough about it to be able to have a conversation with you and other people about it, and I don't hide it. But it does, for me, it's an interesting thing. Even though I have PTSD, it came from a robbery, it's quite easy to understand that most people can imagine that. I still have people that go, you can't have it. They look at me and assume it's not something I can have because I function, I've had a career, I live my life, but I live my life with PTSD. So what I do is manage that to allow me to do what I want to be able to do. And I'm aware there are a lot of people that don't necessarily get that same support. And I've had more people more recently than ever before question whether or not it's justified for me to have a diagnosis of PTSD, even knowing what I've been through. But people's perception is, if you've got a problem with your mental health, how can you do that? But also with PTSD, I'm a 5'6" blonde female. I am not. Most people hear PTSD and their natural assumption is that I must have been, in the army or seen something like that, and I haven't. That's not the case, and actually PTSD is more common than people think, and you get it for a whole host of reasons, one-offs or a multitude of different things, and therefore people's own perceptions of what they think a mental health condition looks like, and I don't necessarily fit. So, but you would think now people are more tolerant. They're actually almost to a certain extent less.